Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, William Galston. William, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure to be here.
We have a really important discussion today centered around immigration. As you know, immigration continues to be one of the top issues facing voters from both parties. And I want to have a nonpartisan discussion on it, especially because we have seen immigration be politicized, be almost a third rail in politics. So to kick off the conversation, why do you think it is the most important issue facing voters as we head into a presidential election?
I'm not sure I would say it is the most important issue. It's certainly one of the top two, the other being inflation and high prices. They're about tied as I read the surveys. And I think the answer is pretty simple. For various reasons, the number of migrants attempting to cross the southern border over the past 4 years has skyrocketed. We can have a long partisan debate about why that is, but that's not why I'm here. That is the fact. And it used to be the case that immigration affected the border states more than any others. But as the result of various factors, including the efforts by the governor of Texas, the governor of Florida, and others to send migrants on buses and even airplanes on north, a number of major cities have received unprecedented flows of migrants over the past year. I'm talking to you from Chicago, where the mayor, in effect, declared a crisis, and and has told existing migrants to move out of their temporary shelters provided by the city so that new ones can be accommodated. Bottom line, at this point, every state is a border state.
Every state is a border state is a sentiment that Republican lawmakers certainly have told me. Democratic lawmakers have said there is a crisis at the southern border in every conversation that I've had surrounding immigration. So why specifically do you think this is such a politicized, partisan issue if everyone can agree, hey, this is one of the top issues facing our nation?
Well, it's one thing to agree that a problem is serious. It's another thing to agree on the solutions. I've been studying immigration for a long time, 30 years. And the last time we reached a national consensus on immigration reform was in the 1980s. We tried in 2006 and failed. We tried again in 2007 and failed. We tried again in 2013, which was our last best chance. And a bipartisan bill came out of the Senate with 68 votes in support, which you don't get for many controversial issues these days. It went over to the House. The Speaker of the House, fearing a revolt on the Republican right, refused to bring the bill to the floor of the House for a vote, even though it would have passed if he had. And with that, the last effort to solve immigration on a bipartisan basis collapsed, and we haven't gotten close since.
You've been studying immigration for 3 decades. You live in Chicago where there is a crisis there is what you're saying. So what do you think is missing from the national dialogue when it comes to this issue then?
Well, first of all, I'm calling you from Chicago or talking to you from Chicago where I'm visiting my grandchildren. I actually live in or around Washington, D.C., just to be clear about that. But look, what's missing is the fact that we haven't reformed our immigration system in more than 40 years. And the bill that was passed 40 years ago really didn't get the job done. So so we're now working with a framework for immigration that goes all the way back to 1965. Imagine if we were trying to run our economic policy or environmental policy or foreign policy or any other policy based on a bill passed almost 60 years ago. Of course, we have to acknowledge that we live in a new world where there are new drivers of migration. We also have new needs in the economy. And we certainly have a need to achieve the rule of law through securing our borders. And that basic fact, I think, has gotten hung up in politics, in part because of controversies over the way the previous administration tried to restrain migration. The tactics were not wildly popular across party lines, to put it mildly. But I think now that the two parties are closer together in their belief that the southern border needs to be secured, and in order to do that, we're going to need to shift gears. But there isn't anything yet like full agreement on the way to do that. And I think it is now understood across the political spectrum that unless and until the southern border is secured, it's going to be very difficult to make progress on all of the other things that are needed in order to update and modernize our immigration system.
Something that I think that's missing from the conversation is what you described as those new drivers of immigration. Can you talk a little bit about what they are?
Well, there is widespread instability in struggling countries throughout the world. The problem that we're having now is not unique to the United States. You see it in Europe as well. You see major movements of people in some regions of Asia. And there are areas in Central America that have been disrupted by climate change, by gangs, by oppressive governance, by lack of economic opportunity. And some of those problems have spread to Africa, which is now providing a substantial share of the new migrants trying to get into the United States, and even Asia. So, 10 or 20 years ago, we were talking mostly about single young Mexican males crossing the border in search of employment so they could help finance their families back home. The picture is much more complicated now. The migrant pool looks like the United Nations at this point. And that means that the United States is going to have to deal with many more nations on a bilateral, multilateral basis in order to try to get a handle on this, because these nations are major drivers of immigration pressure on the United States. So, we weren't talking about this 20 years ago, but we must talk about it.
This is continuing to be an issue as we head into the presidential election. Former President Donald Trump has made it a top platform issue. President Biden addressed it at his State of the Union address. Do you think it will take a time where we're not in an election year to see an actual solution?
I would be amazed if there were anything like a solution in this election year. There may be a Band-Aid put on the southern border, but it's going to take the next administration, whoever leads it. And it's also it will take an elevation of the priority of the issue. What I've seen over and over again is that administrations come into office pledged to do something about this, but any effort to deal with it legislatively is usually put on the back burner, and you get instead a series of executive orders. We've seen this now going back to the Obama administration, through the Trump administration, and now into the Biden administration. The executive branch cannot solve this problem on its own. The Congress of the United States is responsible for establishing the legislative framework for immigration. It has refused or has been unable to do so for decades now. And I hope very much that the next president, whoever he is going to give legislative change the priority that it requires in order to make progress on this issue.
Realistically, what do you think the solution is? Because as you and I know, right now there's a divided government. Maybe in the next administration that won't be the case. But what is a solution that is real, tangible, and could get passed that also addresses these new drivers facing immigration?
Well, clearly, there are a number of elements that need to be addressed. First of all, our asylum laws are now structured to provide incentives for migrants to try to cross into the United States, be apprehended by Customs and Border Protection agents, to make formal and frequently pre-scripted asylum claims, and then wait forever for those claims to be adjudicated. And meanwhile, many of them just fade into the country. So we need a wholesale reform of the asylum system. That's job one. We need also an adjustment of our immigration system to economic realities. People are being pulled into the United States by economic opportunity. Despite our own problems, we're doing better than just about anyone else, and people try to move to opportunity. That's human nature. And we have to figure out what it is we as a country need in order to keep our economy thriving. And that means both in general and specifically. What are our specific labor market needs? How can we best meet them with a mix of domestic labor and labor from abroad? Do we want to establish new permanent programs, temporary programs? Do we want to acknowledge the extraordinary contribution that people who get advanced degrees in the United States can make to our economy? Some people have proposed giving people from abroad with advanced degrees green cards along with their graduation certificates. And I think that's an idea we should consider. If we need seasonal labor in agriculture, hospitality, and elsewhere, let's establish seasonal programs that are carefully monitored so that people are treated appropriately while they're here and that they return home when their period of appointed residence in the United States is over. I could go on, but security at the border, asylum reform, and an update of our overall immigration system to accommodate contemporary economic realities would be a reasonable framework to begin with, details to come.
But you're saying you don't think that will happen until the next election, correct?
I would be astounded if it did, in part, and this is not a partisan comment, but simply a political observation. Former President Trump has made it very clear that he wants to run on this issue, and he strongly discouraged a bipartisan immigration reform bill that was developed by a team of a Republican, a Democrat, and an independent in the Senate. The Senate looked as though it was going to coalesce around that bill. And then Mr. Trump said, "What are you doing?" Right? I want to campaign on this, and don't take the issue away from me. This is not the first time a presidential candidate sent such a message to his own party. I remember back in 1996, Republican presidential candidate Robert Dole pleaded with Republicans in the House and the Senate not to enact a welfare reform bill because Senator Dole wanted to run on that issue. They disregarded him and helped to pass it anyway, giving President Clinton a big win and helping him win re-election. And Donald Trump doesn't want to repeat that experience, so here we are.
They disregarded Bob Dole back then in the 90s, but today it seems like Republicans, they've really got some heat because former President Trump criticized that bill that was touted as the most comprehensive immigration package, and then House Speaker Mike Johnson said it was essentially dead on arrival. The Biden administration has been pilloried, as you know, for record high border crossings in their administration. So do you think there will be a time where this issue is not politicized?
No, I don't. But there will be a time when it may be more possible to deal with it substantively, despite the fact that it is and will remain a hot-button political issue.
As an immigration expert, as someone who has been studying this for decades, what's on your radar? What are you looking out for?
Well, what I'm really looking out for is a serious effort to conduct a conversation across party lines, from the bottom up as well as the top down. It's one thing for a newly elected president, whether or not he's the incumbent, to put an immigration bill to send it to the Senate. Joe Biden will say accurately that he sent he sent the Congress of the United States such a bill on day one of his term. That's true, but nothing happened. The Congress wasn't very interested in taking it up at that point, and the president, for reasons that I think I can understand, wasn't very interested in putting the full weight of his administration behind it because he had other, fish to fry, including economic recovery from the COVID shutdown. But so we're going to need bipartisan discussion from the bottom up of Congress. We're also going to need a president who is willing to move immigration reform farther towards the top of his agenda. And both of those conditions are going to have to be satisfied, and they're going to have to be satisfied, I believe, quite early in the next president's term, because we've seen this pattern now for many years, where most meaningful legislation gets passed in the first 2 years of the president's term, and the next 2 years are given over to preparing for and then conducting a national election.
Do you think, as we sit here right now in March of 2024, immigration is the biggest fish to fry politically?
Well, as I said, it is now one of the top two political issues on the minds of the American people. Political scientists, I trust, analyzed the 2016 presidential election, and I think concluded with a lot of evidence that it was the single most important issue driving Donald Trump to a surprise victory over Hillary Clinton. It may not be quite as big now, but that's only because inflation and high prices, rival it as an issue, and I'm sure it will be addressed and debated in the forthcoming presidential election. I'm quite sure that the American people want it to be addressed and debated. It's an issue that concerns Republicans more than Democrats or independents, but it's of concern across the board, in part because blue state governors and mayors are now having to cope with the consequences of an immigration system that just doesn't work very well.
William Galston, thank you so much for your expertise. I enjoyed the conversation. You're welcome back anytime.
It's been my pleasure.